Hello, everyone. We're going to continue talking about the Cold War today, and we're actually going to finish with the Cold War today. And in particular, the Cold War, we're going to talk about the Cold War at home, as in what was going on in the US while it was going on. And also, we're going to finish the Cold War, talk about how it ended. So, back at the impact of the Cold War at home, the fear of communism and the threat of nuclear war affected American life throughout the Cold War. American citizens were urged by the government to build bomb shelters in their own home. People thought these shelters would protect them if an atomic bomb was ever dropped. And these bomb shelters, this is an example here where they told people to put food in them, maybe a bed, things that you would need to survive and if an atomic bomb was ever dropped. They also wanted it to be built with certain specifications to be so thick so that way if an atomic bomb was dropped, it wouldn't destroy the building, you'd be able to live. And here's another example of one. There's actually houses in the United States that are old enough that were around during the Cold War that they have bomb shelters built into them. People don't use them as bomb shelters because people aren't afraid of atomic bombs anymore like they were back then. They're just rooms, but they were built during this time, bomb shelters. And during the 1950s and 1960s, American schools regularly held drills to train children what to do in case of should say atomic attack. I didn't mean to delete that. In case of an atomic attack. So just like today, we have fire drills, we have tornado drills. They had atomic bomb drills. In these drills, students would hit the floor, duck underneath a desk or table, and cover their head with their hands, just like this. Next, we're going to talk about the Rosenberg trials. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were Americans convicted of spying for the Soviet Union as informants, sharing atomic bomb secrets with the Soviet Union. So they legally gave the Soviet Union information on how to build atomic bombs. And these trials increased the domestic, which means American fears of communism. So this is Julius Rosenberg. This is his wife Ethel. They were American citizens. It turns out, though, that they were working for the Soviet Union. They were spies, and they were giving the Soviet Union secrets on how to build atomic bombs. And a lot of Americans became afraid during this time that the Soviet Union was trying to get information, that there were spies all over the U.S. And the Rosenbergs were convicted solely on the basis of a confession of one of their informants. And there are some who still believe they were innocent. So there's people who think they didn't actually do it. Supposedly, the Rosenbergs were offered a lesser sentence in exchange for their confession. So they were told, if you confess that you did this, we'll give you a lesser sentence. But they were found guilty, they refused, and they were executed. So the U.S. government killed them because they shared secrets with the Soviet Union. It's going to lead to something called McCarthyism. And Senator Joseph McCarthy played on American fears of communism by recklessly accusing many American officials, military, and other citizens of being communists based on flimsy or no evidence. So he said people were communists, even though he had no proof. So he would just kind of go on TV and he would accuse certain people of being communists. If you were an actor and you were accused of being communist, you weren't able to get a job. There's something called a blacklist. But once you were accused of being communist by McCarthy, a lot of people didn't like you. You wouldn't be able to get a job. So it wasn't good. And he usually had no evidence that people were even guilty. He just said they were. And this led to the coining of the term McCarthyism, which is the making a false accusation based on rumor or guilt by association. So that would be like if one of your friends was arrested, the police would just say, oh, we're going to arrest you too because you know him. And that's what McCarthy did. If he found out someone supported communism, he would say all of their friends also supported communism. So he had no evidence, but he just accused people. But it ruined a lot of lives because you can't get a job and people didn't like you if they thought you were communist back then. So now specifically with the Cold War in Virginia, and the heavy military expenditures, which means costs throughout the Cold War, benefited Virginia's economy proportionally more than any other state. Many local private companies were awarded large defense, which means military contracts. All it means is Virginia got a lot of money because the government spent a lot of money on military. Uh, and especially in Hampton Roads, where in Virginia there's home to several large naval and air bases. And Northern Virginia, that's home to the Pentagon and numerous private companies that contract with the military. So Pentagon has a lot of that's where the military headquarters is for the United States. It's in Northern Virginia. And a lot of private companies are in Arlington, Pentagon City, around this area because they're so close to the Pentagon. So Northern Virginia made a lot of money because the government was spending a lot of money on military during this time. We're going to talk about President Ronald Reagan now. He was elected in 1980, and he instituted a policy of massive military buildup. So he made the U.S. military the biggest in the world. The U.S. had the biggest army, the biggest navy. They were the biggest military. He also supported the development of the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, and it's also known as Star Wars. And it would utilize space satellites to shoot down offensive nuclear warheads before reaching the United States. So if the Soviet Union ever decided to shoot a missile or atomic bomb at the U.S. The U.S. had satellites, tracking devices, and there would be devices that would shoot the missile down and blow it up before it can ever reach the U.S. So this was going to make the United States a lot safer. And Reagan also challenged the moral legitimacy of the Soviet Union with strong rhetoric saying, "Tear down this wall," during his speech at the Berlin Wall. And remember, Berlin was divided by a wall at this time. Berlin's the capital city of Germany, and the eastern part of Berlin was under Soviet rule. It was communist, whereas Western Berlin was under United States, French, and British rule, so it was democratic. But the wall divided East Berlin from West Berlin, and it was meant to keep people from East Berlin from escaping. Ultimately, President Reagan and Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev agreed to the terms of the arms reduction in the Strategic Arms Treaty, known as START, and the Soviet Union and the United States agreed to get rid of most of their atomic weapons. We talked about that last class, but instead of having an arms race where they're trying to build the most weapons, now they're going to limit it. And on November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall was torn down. A lot of people in Berlin were excited that the wall was finally coming down. So they literally went to the street with hammers and axes, and they knocked it down and tore it down. It began in 1989. And now we're going to talk about the collapse of the Soviet Union. Collapse means end. So the Soviet Union is going to end. And here's the reasons why. There was rising nationalism in Soviet republics. Countries no longer wanted to be part of the Soviet Union. So countries like Ukraine didn't want to be Soviet Union. They wanted to be Ukraine. They didn't want to be, they had pride in their country, so they didn't want to be part of the Soviet Union. Increasing Soviet military expenses. So the Soviet Union spent all of their money on military, nothing else. There wasn't a lot of money for food. They couldn't really help people. They didn't have doctors because they spent almost all their money on the military. And there was economic inefficiency of communism and fast-paced reforms. So essentially, communism caused the economy to go down. It didn't go very well when the government controls everything. And the Soviet Union collapsed, which means ended in 1991, officially ending the Cold War. So that's why today there's no more Soviet Union. It collapsed in 1991. All right, so that's it for the Cold War. Next class, we're going to review, and then we're going to do the test after that. If you guys have any questions, let me know.